My parents forced me to cancel my sister's golden child engagement party, but I refused. And now everyone is mad at me because all my relatives came to my party instead of hers. Growing up, it was always clear who the favorite child was in our family. My sister, Angela, was the golden child. Everything she did was perfect in my parents' eyes. She was the star student, the prom queen, and later, the successful career woman who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, always felt like I was living in her shadow. My achievements were acknowledged, sure, but they were never celebrated with the same enthusiasm. If Angela brought home an A, it was front-page news in our household. If I brought home an A, it was a quiet pat on the back. My parents' favoritism wasn't subtle. They would make offhand comments about how proud they were of Angela and her accomplishments, often right in front of me. "Angela has always been so driven," my mom would say. "We knew she'd be successful." Or my dad would boast, "Angela just has that spark, you know? She's going places." I often wondered if they realized how hurtful those comments were, but I doubted it. They were so wrapped up in their admiration for Angela that they probably didn't even notice the impact on me. Despite this, I always tried to be the best sister I could be. Angela and I were close, or at least as close as two siblings could be when one is constantly in the limelight. I attended all her school plays, cheered her on at every sporting event, and even helped her study for exams. I genuinely wanted to see her succeed, but I also yearned for some of that praise and recognition for myself. As we grew older, the favoritism didn't fade. It only intensified. Angela landed a high-paying job straight out of college, moved into a swanky apartment downtown, and started dating Ryan, a charming and successful lawyer. My parents were over the moon. "You hit the jackpot, Angela," they exclaimed when they first met him. Meanwhile, I was struggling to find my footing, working a series of dead-end jobs and navigating a string of less-than-ideal relationships. My parents' disappointment in me was palpable, even if they didn't say it outright. Then, the day came when Angela announced her engagement to Ryan. It was a beautiful summer evening, and we were all gathered at our parents' house for a family barbecue. Angela stood up, clinking her glass to get everyone's attention. "Ryan and I have some exciting news," she began, her face glowing with happiness. "We're engaged." The room erupted in cheers and applause. My parents rushed to hug her, tears of joy streaming down their faces. "Oh, Angela, we're so happy for you," my mom cried. "This is the best news ever." My dad was beaming with pride. "You've always made us so proud," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We knew you were destined for great things." I clapped and cheered along with everyone else, but inside, I felt a pang of envy. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Angela. I truly was. But it was yet another reminder of how different our lives were, and how differently we were treated by our parents. A few weeks later, I had my own announcement to make. My boyfriend Mark had proposed, and I said yes. It wasn't as grand a gesture as Angela's. No big family gathering, no clinking of glasses. It happened one evening while we were cuddled up on the couch, watching our favorite TV show. It was simple and intimate, and it felt right. When I told my parents about our engagement, their reaction was tepid at best. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mom said, barely looking up from her book. My dad's response was a distracted congratulations as he fiddled with the remote control. There were no tears of joy, no excited hugs, just a few mumbled words and a quick return to whatever they were doing. It stung, but I tried to brush it off. I was used to it by now. As the weeks went by, Angela and I both started planning our engagement parties. Without realizing it, we scheduled them for the same weekend. When I brought it up to my parents, they looked horrified. "You can't have your party the same weekend as Angela's," my mom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She deserves to have her special moment without any distractions." I was taken aback. "But I already sent out the invitations," I explained. "People have RSVP'd. It's too late to change it now." "Then you'll just have to cancel," my dad said firmly. "Angela's engagement is more important." And there it was, laid out in plain terms. Angela's happiness, her celebration, was more important than mine. They expected me to cancel my party, to step aside once again, so that Angela could have the spotlight all to herself. For the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to cancel my party. I deserved to celebrate my engagement just as much as Angela did. This time I was going to stand up for myself, no matter what the consequences might be. The confrontation with my parents was inevitable. I had to summon all my courage to tell them I wasn't going to cancel my engagement party. We were sitting in the living room, my mom engrossed in her knitting and my dad reading the newspaper. I cleared my throat, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. My mom looked up, her knitting needles pausing mid-stitch. My dad lowered his newspaper and gave me a quizzical look. "What is it, dear?" my mom asked. "I'm not going to cancel my engagement party," I said, trying to sound firm and resolute. "I've thought about it, and it's important to me. I deserve to celebrate too." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's face contorted with a mix of shock and disbelief. My dad's expression hardened, and he set his newspaper aside with a sigh. "Do you realize what you're saying?" my mom asked, her voice icy. "You're going to ruin Angela's special day. This is her moment." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I replied, my voice gaining strength. "I just want to celebrate my engagement too. It's not fair that I have to cancel my plans just because Angela is the golden child." My dad's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. "How dare you speak like that?" he thundered. "Angela has always been there for you, and this is how you repay her? By being selfish and inconsiderate?" "It's not about being selfish," I said, trying to keep my composure. "It's about standing up for myself for once. I've always stepped aside for Angela, but not this time. I deserve to be happy too." My mom's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head in disappointment. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us?" The guilt trip was in full swing, but I stood my ground. "I'm not canceling my party," I repeated. "I'm sorry if that upsets you, but it's my decision." The tension in the room was unbearable. My dad stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "If you go through with this, don't expect us to support you," he warned. "You'll be on your own." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. "I understand," I said quietly. "But this is something I have to do." My mom's tears turned into silent sobs, and my dad stormed out of the room. I felt a pang of guilt, but also a sense of liberation. For the first time, I was asserting myself, refusing to be overshadowed by my sister. As I walked out of the living room, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I knew I was risking a lot by standing up to my parents, but I also knew it was time to break free from their favoritism. I deserved my moment in the sun, even if it meant facing their wrath. I called Mark and told him about the confrontation. He was supportive as always. "You did the right thing," he said. "We deserve to celebrate our engagement. Don't let them make you feel guilty." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. I knew he was right, but I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. My parents were furious, and I could only imagine how Angela would react when she found out. The days leading up to the engagement parties were tense. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was with a cold, detached tone. I tried to focus on the preparations for my party, but the weight of their disapproval hung over me like a dark cloud. I confided in a few close friends who were outraged on my behalf. "They can't treat you like this," my best friend Sarah said. "You have every right to have your own celebration. We'll make sure your party is amazing." Their support bolstered my spirits, and I threw myself into the preparations with renewed energy. I booked a beautiful venue, ordered delicious catering, and sent out invitations to our friends and family. Mark and I were determined to make our engagement party a memorable event, no matter what. The day of the parties arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. I dressed in a beautiful gown, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Mark looked dashing in his suit, his eyes filled with love and reassurance. "You look stunning," he said, kissing my forehead. "This is our day. Let's make the most of it." We arrived at the venue, and I was touched by the number of people who showed up to support us. Friends, cousins, even a few aunts and uncles who had always been kind to me. The atmosphere was warm and festive, filled with laughter and joy. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help but think about Angela's party. I knew my parents were there, along with most of our relatives. I wondered how Angela was feeling, whether she was angry or hurt by the situation. But I pushed those thoughts aside, determined to enjoy my own celebration. Just as we were about to cut the cake, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Angela. "I can't believe you did this to me," the message read. "I hope you're happy." My heart sank. I knew there would be fallout, but seeing Angela's words in black and white made it all the more real. I showed the message to Mark, who squeezed my hand. "Don't let it ruin our night," he said gently. "You deserve this." I nodded, trying to shake off the guilt. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. As we cut the cake and toasted to our future, I felt a surge of happiness and pride. I had stood up for myself, and it felt incredible. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The aftermath of the parties was like a bomb going off in our family. My parents returned home the day after Angela's party, their faces grim and their demeanor icy. They didn't speak to me as I sat in the living room, flipping through photos from my engagement party, reliving the joyous moments. I had expected this, but it still hurt. Angela hadn't called or texted again since the curt message during the party. I had hoped she might cool down and understand my side of things, but as the days passed, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. I knew I had to confront her sooner or later, but the thought filled me with dread. Angela was used to getting her way, and I doubted she'd take this slight lying down. I finally decided to visit her at her apartment. As I rode the elevator up to her floor, I rehearsed what I would say. I wanted to apologize for any hurt feelings, but also make it clear that I had every right to celebrate my engagement. My hands were shaking as I knocked on her door. Angela opened it, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She was livid. Her eyes were red, and it looked like she'd been crying. Without a word, she turned and walked back into her apartment, leaving the door open for me to follow. "Angela," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can we talk?" She whirled around to face me, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. "What's there to talk about?" she snapped. "You ruined my engagement party, and for what? To prove a point?" "I didn't ruin anything," I replied, struggling to keep my composure. "I just wanted to celebrate my engagement too. Why is that so hard for everyone to understand?" "Because you chose the same weekend," Angela shouted, her voice cracking. "You knew this was important to me, and you did it anyway. You couldn't let me have one moment, could you?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Angela, it's not about taking anything away from you. It's about finally standing up for myself. You've always been the favorite, always the center of attention. I just wanted one thing for myself." Angela scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You're so selfish. You know that? Mom and Dad are furious, and it's all because of you." I felt a surge of anger. "Selfish? Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what it's like to live in your shadow, to be constantly overlooked and undervalued? This was my chance to have something for myself, and I took it. I'm not going to apologize for that." Angela's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might actually hit me. But instead she turned away, her shoulders slumping. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "This was supposed to be my moment, and you took that away from me." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. I wanted to bridge the gap between us, but I didn't know how. Angela's pain was evident, and part of me felt guilty. But another part of me was resolute. I had done the right thing for myself and I couldn't back down now. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said finally, "but I'm not sorry for having my party. I deserved that. We both did." Angela didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the floor. I realized then that this wasn't something that would be resolved with one conversation. It would take time if it could be mended at all. I left her apartment feeling drained and defeated. The confrontation had taken more out of me than I had expected. I drove home in a daze, replaying the argument over and over in my head. When I walked through the front door, my parents were waiting for me. My mom looked like she had been crying and my dad's expression was stony. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I sighed, dropping my bag by the door. "What now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Angela called us," my mom said, her voice trembling. "She's devastated. Do you have any idea how much you hurt her?" "Yes, I do," I replied, feeling a fresh wave of frustration. "But what about me? What about how I've been treated all these years? Does that not matter?" My dad's eyes flashed with anger. "This isn't about you. This is about family, and you've torn this family apart with your selfishness." I felt the words like a slap in the face. Selfishness? Is it selfish to want to celebrate my engagement? Is it selfish to want to be treated as an equal for once? My mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You've always been so difficult, always causing trouble. Angela has never caused us this much pain." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Causing trouble? You mean by not being perfect like Angela? By not living up to your impossible standards?" My dad stepped forward, his face inches from mine. "You need to fix this," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "Apologize to your sister. Make this right or you'll regret it." I stood my ground, refusing to back down. "No. I'm done apologizing for being myself. If you can't accept that, then that's your problem, not mine." With that, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let my parents or my sister dictate my life any longer. I was finally standing up for myself, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Walking away from my parents that night felt like stepping off a cliff. I had no idea where I would land, but there was no turning back. The house felt colder, emptier, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved tensions. I retreated to my room trying to process everything. I had stood up for myself, but at what cost? Mark called me later that evening, his voice a comforting balm. "How did it go with Angela?" he asked, already knowing the answer wasn't good. "Not well," I admitted, recounting the confrontation and the subsequent clash with my parents. "They think I'm selfish and that I've ruined everything." "Hey, listen to me," Mark said firmly. "You did the right thing. You have every right to celebrate your engagement. They're just not used to you standing up for yourself, but that doesn't make you wrong." His words gave me strength, but the fear of losing my family's support still gnawed at me. I knew I needed to rally more support, not just from Mark, but from those who had always seen through the favoritism. I reached out to Sarah, my best friend, who had been my rock through so many storms. "Sarah, I need to talk," I said when she answered my call. "I'm on my way," she replied without hesitation. Sarah arrived within minutes, armed with a bottle of wine and a sympathetic ear. We sat in my room, sipping wine and talking late into the night. I poured my heart out, sharing my fears and frustrations. Sarah listened intently, her face reflecting a mix of anger and empathy. "They can't treat you like this," she said, echoing Mark's sentiment. "You've been living in Angela's shadow for too long. It's about time you stepped into the light." "I just feel so guilty," I confessed. "I never wanted to hurt Angela. I just wanted something for myself for once." Sarah shook her head. "You have nothing to feel guilty about. Angela and your parents need to realize that you're not a backup character in their lives. You're the main character in your own story." Her words resonated deeply, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone in this. I had people who believed in me, who saw my worth. I decided to reach out to more family members to see where they stood. I needed to know I wasn't completely isolated. The next day I made a list of relatives who had always been supportive, even if subtly. My Aunt Karen, my mom's sister, was at the top of that list. She had always been a kind presence, never overtly taking sides, but always offering a word of encouragement when I needed it most. I called her, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Hi, sweetheart." Aunt Karen's cheerful voice greeted me. "How are you?" I hesitated for a moment before diving in. "Aunt Karen, I need to talk to you about something important." "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" she asked, her tone immediately shifting to concern. I explained the situation, my voice trembling as I recounted the events leading up to and following the engagement parties. Aunt Karen listened without interruption, her silence filled with understanding. "Oh, honey," she said softly when I finished. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. You did nothing wrong. You have every right to celebrate your engagement." "Thank you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I just feel so alone in this." "You're not alone," Aunt Karen assured me. "I'll talk to your parents. They need to understand that their behavior isn't fair to you. And as for Angela, she'll come around eventually. She's just used to being the center of attention." Her words were a balm to my wounded heart. We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt a little more at ease. Aunt Karen's support meant the world to me, and I knew she would advocate for me with my parents. Over the next few days, I reached out to more relatives, carefully gauging their reactions. To my relief, several of them expressed sympathy and support. My cousin Lisa, who had always been more like a sister to me than Angela, was particularly vocal. "Your parents need a reality check," Lisa said bluntly. "You're just as important as Angela, and it's about time they realize that. If they can't see it, that's their problem." Her fierce loyalty brought tears to my eyes. "Thanks, Lisa. I just wish things weren't so complicated." "Family dynamics are always complicated," she replied. "But you can't let them walk all over you. You deserve happiness too." I felt a renewed sense of determination. With the support of Mark, Sarah, Aunt Karen, Lisa, and others, I began to feel stronger. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the recognition and respect I deserved. But as the days passed, the tension with my parents remained. They were still cold and distant, and every attempt I made to bridge the gap was met with stony silence. I knew this wasn't going to be resolved quickly, but I was prepared to stand my ground. Then, one evening, as I was preparing dinner with Mark, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, looking grim. "We need to talk," my dad said, his voice brooking no argument. I invited them in, my heart pounding. Mark stayed by my side, his presence a steadying force. "We've spoken with Karen," my mom began, her voice strained. "She made us realize that perhaps we haven't been fair to you." I was stunned. I hadn't expected Aunt Karen to have such a swift impact. "Thank you for saying that," I replied cautiously. "I just want to be treated equally." My dad nodded, though his expression was still tight. "We're willing to try to understand your perspective. But you need to understand that Angela is hurt. We all need to find a way to move forward together." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "I want that too. I never wanted to hurt Angela. I just want to be seen and appreciated for who I am." The conversation was tense but productive. We agreed to try to rebuild our relationship, starting with more open communication. My parents promised to make an effort to be more fair and understanding, and I promised to be patient as we worked through the issues. It was a small step, but it felt significant. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope that things could change. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with the support of those who believed in me, I was ready to face whatever came next. The cautious truce with my parents was a fragile one, but it gave me some comfort as I navigated the aftermath of the engagement party fiasco. Angela, however, was still a looming storm cloud. She had retreated into a stony silence, avoiding any contact with me. Every time I tried to reach out, I was met with curt replies or no response at all. I could feel her resentment simmering, and it weighed heavily on me. Meanwhile, Mark and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. It was a welcome distraction, a chance to focus on something positive amidst the family drama. We chose a beautiful venue, started working on the guest list, and even found the perfect caterer. Despite the ongoing tension, I was determined to make our wedding a joyous occasion. Then, one day, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from Angela and Ryan, inviting us to their wedding. The date was set for 6 months from now, and the ceremony promised to be a lavish affair. My parents had clearly spared no expense. As I stared at the ornate invitation, a mixture of emotions washed over me. I was happy for Angela, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being overshadowed once again. A week later, we hosted a small family gathering at our home. It was supposed to be a step towards mending fences, a chance for everyone to come together and start fresh. Angela and Ryan were invited, along with our parents, Aunt Karen, and a few other relatives who had supported me. The atmosphere was tense from the moment Angela walked in. She barely acknowledged me, her expression frosty. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she brushed me off with monosyllabic answers. My parents hovered nearby, their anxiety palpable. As we sat down to dinner, the silence was thick and uncomfortable. Mark, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood with some light-hearted jokes, but they fell flat. It was clear that no one was in the mood for laughter. Halfway through the meal, Angela finally broke her silence. "I suppose you've received our wedding invitation," she said, her tone icy. "Yes, we did," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "It looks beautiful. We're really looking forward to it." Angela's eyes narrowed. "I hope there won't be any scheduling conflicts this time," she said pointedly. I felt a surge of anger, but forced myself to stay calm. "We won't have any conflicts," I said evenly. "We want to be there to support you." Angela snorted. "Support? That's rich coming from you." My parents exchanged worried glances, and Aunt Karen shot me a sympathetic look. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Angela, I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to celebrate my own engagement. Can't we move past this?" Angela set her fork down with a clatter. "Move past this? Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? Everyone was asking why so many people went to your party instead of mine. It was supposed to be my special day, and you ruined it." "I didn't ruin anything," I protested, my voice rising. "People came to my party because they wanted to support me, just like they wanted to support you. There's no competition here." Angela's face flushed with anger. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who was left standing in an almost empty room." My dad finally spoke up, his voice stern. "Enough. Both of you. This isn't helping anyone." I felt tears welling up, but blinked them back. "I'm sorry you felt that way, Angela. But I'm not going to apologize for wanting to celebrate my engagement. We both deserved our moments." Angela pushed her chair back and stood up. "You know what? I can't do this. I can't pretend everything's fine when it's not." With that, she stormed out of the house, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Ryan looked awkwardly around the table before mumbling an apology and following her out. My parents looked devastated, and Aunt Karen sighed deeply. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My mom shook her head. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. This is something Angela needs to work through. We all do." The rest of the evening passed in a strained silence. After everyone left, Mark held me close, his arms a comforting refuge. "We'll get through this," he whispered, "one step at a time." The next few weeks were a blur of wedding preparations and awkward family interactions. Angela continued to avoid me, and my parents were caught in the middle trying to appease both of us. I threw myself into planning, determined to create the perfect wedding despite the family drama. Then, the day of Angela's bridal shower arrived. My mom had organized the event, and it was held at a fancy hotel downtown. I decided to attend, hoping to show my support and maybe start mending our fractured relationship. I arrived early helping my mom set up the decorations and arrange the gifts. When Angela walked in, she looked stunning in a flowing white dress, her face radiant with happiness. For a moment I felt a pang of envy, but I quickly pushed it aside. This was her day, and I wanted to be there for her. As the guests mingled and chatted, I made my way over to Angela. "You look beautiful," I said sincerely. "Thanks," she replied, her tone neutral. "I just wanted to say that I'm really happy for you," I continued. "I know things have been tough between us, but I hope we can move past it." Angela sighed, her expression softening slightly. "It's just hard, you know? I felt like you stole my thunder, and it's been difficult to get over that." "I understand," I said quietly, "but I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to have my own moment too." Angela nodded slowly. "Maybe we can start fresh," she said hesitantly. "I'd like that," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. The rest of the bridal shower went smoothly, and I started to feel a sense of relief. Perhaps this was the beginning of healing, a chance to rebuild our relationship. But deep down I knew it would take time and effort from both of us. As I drove home, I reflected on the events of the past few months. Standing up for myself had been difficult and painful, but it was necessary. I had learned that my happiness and self-worth were just as important as anyone else's. It was a hard lesson, but one that I needed to learn. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges and more confrontations. But I was ready to face them, with the support of those who believed in me and loved me for who I was. And that made all the difference. Angela's bridal shower had given me a small glimmer of hope. For a moment it felt like we might be able to move past the tension and resentment. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope began to fade. Angela's attempts at reconciliation were half-hearted at best. She remained distant and cold, and the rift between us seemed to widen. My parents were stuck in the middle, trying to bridge the gap but often making things worse. Their attempts to mediate felt forced and insincere, like they were just going through the motions. The truth was, they were still heavily invested in Angela's happiness above all else. They wanted us to get along, but they didn't really understand or acknowledge the depth of my hurt and frustration. Then came the fallout. Word of our family drama had spread among our relatives, and everyone had their own opinions. Some sympathized with me, understanding my desire to stand up for myself. Others sided with Angela, believing I had overstepped and caused unnecessary conflict. The family gatherings became minefields with whispered conversations and sideways glances. One afternoon, I received a call from my cousin Jessica. She was one of the few people who had remained neutral throughout the ordeal. We had always been close, and I trusted her opinion. "Hey," Jessica said, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I replied, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. "I just wanted to check in on you," she said. "I've heard a lot of things, and I wanted to hear your side of the story." I sighed, recounting the events once again. It was exhausting, but I needed to get it off my chest. Jessica listened patiently, her silence filled with understanding. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said when I finished. "Family dynamics can be so complicated, but I want you to know that I support you. You deserve to be happy and celebrated too." "Thank you," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "It means a lot to hear that." Jessica's support gave me a boost of confidence. I realized that I needed to focus on the people who stood by me rather than those who judged me. It was a lesson in choosing my battles and valuing the relationships that truly mattered. But the backlash wasn't limited to family. Angela's friends, who had always been an extension of her circle, began to distance themselves from me. They viewed me as the troublemaker, the one who had disrupted Angela's perfect life. Social media became a minefield, with passive-aggressive posts and thinly veiled comments. I tried to rise above it, but it was hard not to feel hurt and isolated. Mark was my rock during this time, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to lean on. He encouraged me to focus on our wedding plans, to channel my energy into something positive. One evening, as we were finalizing the guest list, Mark looked at me with a serious expression. "Have you thought about inviting Angela and Ryan to our wedding?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I hadn't considered it, partly out of fear of more conflict. But Mark's suggestion made sense. If we were truly trying to move forward, this could be an olive branch. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "What if it just makes things worse?" Mark took my hand, his gaze steady. "It's a risk, but it might also be a step towards healing. It's up to you, though. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." His support gave me the courage to consider it seriously. I decided to extend the invitation, hoping it would be seen as a gesture of goodwill. Angela's response was lukewarm, but she accepted. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. As the wedding day approached, the tension with Angela and my parents remained. But there were also moments of tentative peace. We managed to have a few civil conversations, avoiding the minefields of our past conflicts. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The day of our wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. The venue looked stunning. The decorations a perfect reflection of our love and commitment. Friends and family gathered, their smiles and laughter filling the air with joy. As I walked down the aisle, my heart swelled with happiness. Mark stood at the altar, his eyes shining with love. It was a moment I would cherish forever, a reminder that despite all the challenges, we had made it here together. The ceremony was beautiful, and as we exchanged vows, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was our day, our moment to celebrate our love and commitment. I glanced at the crowd and saw Angela sitting with Ryan, her expression unreadable. It was enough that she was there. The reception was a whirlwind of dancing, laughter, and heartfelt toasts. My parents approached us with tentative smiles, offering their congratulations. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. Aunt Karen and Jessica were beaming, their support unwavering. As the night wore on, Angela and I found ourselves standing near the dance floor, watching the guests enjoy themselves. There was an awkward silence between us, but I decided to break it. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice sincere. "It means a lot to me." Angela nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Congratulations," she said quietly. "You look happy." "I am," I replied. "I hope we can find a way to move past everything." Angela sighed, her gaze distant. "It's going to take time, but I think we can try." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. As we stood there, watching the celebration unfold, I felt a sense of hope. The journey had been difficult, and there were still challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them with the support of my loved ones. The wedding marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Mark and me, but for my relationship with my family. It was a reminder that even in the face of conflict and resentment, there was always a possibility for healing and growth. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace with my choices. Our wedding had been a beautiful moment of joy amidst the chaos. But the path to healing our fractured family relationships was far from over. Angela and I had taken a tentative step toward reconciliation, but there were still many unspoken words and unresolved feelings between us. My parents' attempts at fairness remained inconsistent, and the old habits of favoritism still lingered in the background. In the weeks following the wedding, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led us to this point. I realized that while I had been focused on standing up for myself and seeking recognition, I had neglected to understand Angela's perspective. It was time to bridge the gap between us by reaching out and trying to understand her side of the story. One evening, I decided to invite Angela out for coffee. I knew it was a risk, given our recent history, but I hoped that a neutral setting might encourage an open conversation. To my surprise, she accepted the invitation. We met at a cozy little cafe downtown, the kind of place where the atmosphere was warm and inviting. As we sat down with our lattes, there was an awkward silence between us. I took a deep breath, deciding to break the ice. "Angela, I know things have been really difficult between us," I began, my voice tentative. But I want to understand your side of things. I want to know how you felt throughout all of this." Angela looked surprised, her eyes widening slightly. She took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I guess I never really thought about how this affected you," she admitted. "I've always been the one in the spotlight, and I never considered what it must have been like for you." Her words were a revelation. It was the first time she had acknowledged the imbalance between us. "It's been hard," I said softly. "I always felt like I was living in your shadow, and it made me resentful. But I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to be seen." Angela nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I can see that now, and I'm sorry if I ever made you feel that way. I guess I was so caught up in my own world that I didn't realize how it was affecting you." There was a pause as we both absorbed the weight of her words. It felt like a small crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. "I think we both need to find a way to move forward," I said. "We can't change the past, but we can try to understand each other better." Angela smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "I'd like that," she said. "It's going to take time, but I'm willing to try." From that day on, our relationship began to shift. It was a slow process, filled with ups and downs, but we made an effort to communicate more openly. We started having regular coffee dates, where we would talk about everything from work to wedding plans to our childhood memories. It was a chance to rebuild our bond, one conversation at a time. My parents, too, were making an effort to change. Aunt Karen's intervention had opened their eyes to the consequences of their favoritism. They began to make small gestures to show their support for me, like inviting Mark and me over for dinner or asking about our wedding plans. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. One weekend, my parents invited us all to a family barbecue. It was the first time we would all be together since the wedding, and I was both excited and apprehensive. As we gathered in the backyard, the atmosphere was a mix of nostalgia and new beginnings. Angela and I found ourselves standing by the grill, helping our dad with the burgers. It felt like old times, but with a new layer of understanding. We laughed and joked, sharing stories from our childhood, and for a moment, it felt like the tension had lifted. Later, as we sat around the table, my mom raised her glass for a toast. "To family," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To healing and new beginnings." We all clinked our glasses, and I felt a surge of hope. It was a reminder that despite the challenges, we were all committed to finding a way forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be setbacks, but we were willing to try. As the evening wore on, I found myself sitting next to Angela, watching the sunset. "Thank you for giving us a chance to start over," I said quietly. Angela smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "Thank you for standing up for yourself. It made me realize that I needed to change too." We sat in companionable silence, the past behind us and the future uncertain but promising. It was a new understanding, a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with my family and with myself. The weeks turned into months, and the effort to rebuild our relationships continued. There were still moments of tension and disagreement, but we faced them with a newfound willingness to understand and support each other. Mark and I settled into married life, and we found joy in the small moments, like cooking dinner together or taking long walks in the park. We started talking about our future, about the possibility of starting a family. It was a conversation filled with excitement and a little bit of nervousness, but it was a testament to how far we had come. Angela and Ryan's wedding was approaching, and I was determined to be there for her, just as she had been for me. We spent weekends together, working on wedding plans and bonding over shared experiences. It was a time of healing and growth, and it brought us closer than we had ever been. The day of Angela's wedding arrived, and it was a beautiful sunlit day. The ceremony was held at a picturesque garden with flowers in full bloom and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. As I stood by Angela's side, helping her with her dress, I felt a deep sense of pride and happiness. "You look stunning," I said, my voice filled with emotion. Angela smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you." The ceremony was a celebration of love and commitment, and as Angela and Ryan exchanged their vows, I felt a renewed sense of hope. It was a reminder that despite the challenges and conflicts, love had the power to heal and bring people together. The reception was a joyful affair, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. My parents approached me, their expressions soft and warm. "We're so proud of you," my dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown so much strength and courage." My mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "We love you, and we're sorry for everything. We promise to do better." I hugged them both, feeling a rush of love and forgiveness. "Thank you," I said. "I love you too." As the night drew to a close, I found myself standing with Angela, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. "We've come a long way," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Angela nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes, we have, and I wouldn't have it any other way." The journey to a new understanding had been difficult, but it had brought us closer than ever before. We had learned to communicate, to support each other, and to value our individual strengths and differences. As I stood there, surrounded by family and friends, I felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. It was a new chapter, a new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. And so our story continued, filled with love, growth, and the promise of a brighter future. We had faced our challenges head-on and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. Angela's wedding marked a significant turning point in our family. The ceremony had been beautiful, a perfect blend of joy and love, and it had given us all a chance to start anew. As I watched Angela and Ryan dance under the twinkling lights, surrounded by family and friends, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. But the journey didn't end with the wedding. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where we would continue to build and strengthen our relationships. The months that followed were filled with small, meaningful moments that gradually mended the rifts between us. One weekend, Angela and I decided to take a sister's trip to the mountains. It was a spontaneous decision, driven by a desire to reconnect and spend quality time together. We packed our bags, hopped into my car, and set off on an adventure. The drive was filled with laughter and music, a stark contrast to the tense silences that had once characterized our interactions. We talked about everything and nothing, reminiscing about our childhood and sharing our dreams for the future. As we hiked through the scenic trails, surrounded by the beauty of nature, I felt a sense of liberation. It was as if the weight of our past conflicts had finally lifted, leaving room for new experiences and memories. One evening, as we sat by the campfire, roasting marshmallows and gazing at the stars, Angela turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," she said, "and I realized that I never really appreciated how hard it must have been for you." Her words took me by surprise. "Angela, She held up a hand, stopping me. "Let me finish. I was so caught up in my own world and being the golden child that I didn't see how it affected you. I'm truly sorry for that. I know it doesn't erase the past, but I hope we can move forward from here." I felt tears welling up, but they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Angela. That means more to me than you know. I'm sorry, too, for any pain I caused. I just wanted to be seen and appreciated." Angela nodded, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "I see you now, and I appreciate you more than ever. You've shown so much strength and courage, and I'm proud to be your sister." We hugged, a genuine, heartfelt embrace that felt like a promise of better days to come. It was a moment of healing, a testament to how far we had come. Back home, my relationship with my parents continued to improve. They were making a conscious effort to be more supportive and understanding, and I could see the change in their actions. They were more present, more attentive, and more willing to listen. One evening, my mom invited Mark and me over for dinner. As we sat around the table enjoying a delicious meal, my dad raised a toast. "To family," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To new beginnings and the strength to face them together." We clinked our glasses and I felt a rush of gratitude. We had faced our challenges head-on, and we were stronger for it. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Mark and I settled into married life, and we found joy in the simple things. We spent weekends exploring new places, trying new recipes, and planning for the future. Our conversations about starting a family became more serious, and we decided that we were ready to take that step. When we found out we were expecting our first child, it was a moment of pure joy. We shared the news with our family, and their reactions were filled with excitement and happiness. My parents were over the moon, eager to become grandparents, and Angela was thrilled to become an aunt. The months of pregnancy were a whirlwind of preparations and anticipation. Angela was a constant source of support, helping me with nursery planning and offering advice. Our bond had grown stronger, and I cherished every moment we spent together. The day our baby was born was the happiest day of my life. As I held our daughter in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and completeness. Mark was by my side, his eyes filled with tears of joy, and I knew that our journey had come full circle. We named her Hope, a symbol of the new beginnings and the strength that had carried us through. Our family gathered to celebrate her arrival, and as I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. My parents, Angela, Ryan, Aunt Karen, Jessica, and all the other relatives who had supported us were there, their faces filled with love and pride. It was a moment of unity, a reminder that despite the challenges we had faced, we were a family, bound by love and resilience. As I cradled Hope in my arms, I whispered a silent promise to her. I would always be there for her, supporting her, loving her, and ensuring she felt seen and appreciated. I would teach her the importance of standing up for herself and valuing her own worth. The journey that had begun with my parents' ultimatum had brought us here, to a place of healing and new beginnings. It wasn't perfect, and there would be more challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them together. As I looked into Hope's eyes, I felt a surge of gratitude for everything that had led us to this moment. The struggles, the conflicts, and the growth had all been part of our story, and they had made us stronger. And so our story continued, filled with love, growth, and the promise of a brighter future. We had faced our challenges head-on and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Have you ever faced a similar situation in your family? How did you navigate it, and what did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Let's continue this conversation and support each other as we navigate the complexities of family and relationships.